following is a local resident producers program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Media Services, the City of Oshkosh, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi everybody, welcome to Eye on Oshkosh. Cheryl, Hentz, and Dan Rylance here. Very pleased to be back after a little hiatus for some personal things that we had to take care of, that I had to take care of. And Dan's going to be taking care of a few personal things in the next few weeks too, so you will not be here, but I'll be manning the helm and steering us in the right direction.
It's good to have you back so soon. Your recovery period has been unbelievable.
Remarkable.
Yeah.
So anyway, on this edition of Eye on Oshkosh, we're going to be talking about an issue that has been written about in the paper over the last several months or so. There is a concept or an idea to bring a warming shelter into the Oshkosh area for the folks who need it. And joining us on this edition to talk about the need and how this would all work is to my left, Tina Haffeman, and also Stephanie Gildenvand is here. They are both with the ESTHER organization. And we're going to find out exactly what ESTHER is, but ESTHER is the organization that has been sort of spearheading this effort, and we're very pleased to have both of you here tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Especially on a very cold night, but it's warm in here.
It is toasty.
So let's talk first about what ESTHER is. You know, since you're both associated with ESTHER, you're a volunteer, you're a paid person, you're a staff person. What exactly is ESTHER?
ESTHER is a Fox Valley from the Appleton area down through Oshkosh and over to Omro interfaith organization that's congregation based, and we work to identify and address issues in the community that people in our congregations would like to see addressed so that we can have a strong impact and have a more just and value-based community.
Okay, all right. And how long has ESTHER, and it's all in capital letters, yes?
Yes.
ESTHER. Does that stand for anything in particular?
Yes, each of the letters stands for words that the founding group has developed. So it was empowerment, solidarity, truth, hope, equality, reform.
Okay, all right. Well, I wasn't going to ask necessarily.
I thought it
but
was.
you did.
I thought it was from the Old Testament. I thought that's why you picked it.
Well,
And
it happens to work out that way
Okay,
also.
yeah, because Esther is prominent.
Yeah.
Sure, and Queen Esther did a great deed in delivering her people and saving their lives, and a great pioneer of social justice.
Sure.
Absolutely. How long has ESTHER been in the Oshkosh area? And is it just in the Oshkosh area, or are there ESTHER groups elsewhere?
Well, ESTHER is a Fox Valley organization, and so I became involved with it up in Neenah and Appleton at churches or events they had up there. And then I thought it would be nice to have some churches down here involved, so we began it here about a year and a half ago.
Okay.
So we call it Oshkosh-ESTHER because we like how it sounds, Esther.
Oh,
Esther.
Okay, all right. Hey,
So it differentiates us, but we are part of their, we are a cluster group actually is what we call ourselves. We're sort of a new part. But Esther's here, and then there are several other, Wisdom is a state group. And so there's ESTHER, and there's Micah down in Milwaukee, and
there's 10 affiliates of
10,
Wisdom. So we have in Wausau, Eau Claire, La Crosse. The Madison area is something that's newly developed. Milwaukee, Waukesha, Racine, Kenosha, and then in northeastern Wisconsin we have ESTHER in the Fox Cities, Joshua in Green Bay, and Ruth over in the Manitowoc area.
Okay, all right. Well, one of the things that Oshkosh-ESTHER, or OESTHER, has been really heavily involved in for some time now, is this idea of a warming shelter in Oshkosh. And I think maybe some people have misconceptions about what a warming shelter really is. So maybe we should start there by, saying, well, explaining what is a warming shelter.
Sure.
Whoever wants to
Actually,
take that
I'll
one.
take a step even before then. When
Okay.
we first brought the Oshkosh group together, it was a group of clergy and congregation folks that sat down, probably 30 people around a table, and we were trying to figure out what's the most important issue in Oshkosh at this point to address. And they determined that homelessness was the first issue that they wanted to address, and then the secondary was transportation, but they only wanted to deal with one at a time. And so the question was, what's the issue with homelessness? Why do we have people that are still unsheltered in our community? And Tina worked with a group of people, and maybe you can take it from here, of how you discovered it was that a warming shelter was the gap that we needed.
Well, we began to explore that. The clergy that is in downtown, Trinity Episcopal, First Congregational, First Presbyterian, Christ Lutheran, there's several within this small
So this
area.
is totally interdenominational?
Yes,
okay.
interfaith, yes.
Okay.
They have many people coming to their doors. They're downtown. This is people come to their doors. Father Powers was in on the first meeting. He's from Trinity Episcopal and said, I get people every day. The minute it starts getting cold, I get people every day. And I don't have a place. The Salvation Army has some vouchers they give, but not very many, and that's cut down. They sometimes go to hotels. They sometimes go to the town motel. This is often where Father would get discretionary funds until they ran out to put them up. There wasn't really a place for a certain population. Father Carr's takes care of a great many people who need shelter. But
And let me just, I'm sorry to interrupt, but let's just say that Father Carr's, we do have Joe Janess here tonight
Right.
from Father Carr's. He's going to be joining us a little bit later on in the show to talk about, their involvement, why a warming shelter is necessary, despite Father Carr's being here and that kind of thing. So anyway, sorry
right,
to
it's just
interrupt.
it's a different population.
Yes,
And
yeah.
a warming shelter is not a term that's used nationally. It's sometimes people from other states will say, "A warming shelter, what is that?" Or people go, "Is that the thing where when you go ice skating, you go in there?"
No, that's what it's called.
I know, that's what it was called.
Yeah.
But it's a term used around here. There are warming shelters in Green Bay, Appleton, and Fond du Lac, and we have been lucky enough to follow their models. And so after this group discerned that that was an issue that seemed to be clear here, that we heard this from community members, from clergy members, we began to do research on that. And we researched the other shelters to see how they did it, but then to find out about what the need here was, we did a couple things. One thing was we talked to Joe and said, how many people do you have a night or a week that you feel you cannot serve? And we will talk about that later. But and his estimate is 10, 12, 15 maybe on a given night that he is unable to serve, especially in the deep winter like now. So that's one place we got it. Advocap does a point-in-time survey actually twice a year. That's done, that's a HUD survey. And they survey all the organizations that would have anything to do with people who do not have shelter. And it's a point-in-time one day. So on one day, those agencies are asked to, how many people did you come in contact with on that one day? And so from that, and then also we added they added last summer, I forget what you call it, but we actually had people go out in teams and look in the middle of the night for people who were homeless.
Just doing a survey at night.
Doing a survey at night, yes.
Right.
And there's a term for that, and I just
Yeah.
can't think of it right now. They also did it just this last week. I did not help with the one this week. The one in the summer was sort of
Better.
nice. Yeah. But they did do it this week again, and so they take that number. And so from that number, I think, I don't have the results from like this week, but in July, I think it was something like 11 to 15 people that they just that were identified on that night. Also, the police have said that during the last shelter season, and a shelter season is about October through April, shelters run that cold time and only at night. They feel that they took maybe or arranged for 25 people from Oshkosh to be taken to the Appleton shelter, which was already up and running throughout the entire season. So that's where we get some of these numbers from. So there is a definite need. we don't think it's a huge population, but it is a definite population.
How does, and you sort of have already intimated the answer to this, but if we can expand on it a little bit, how does a warming shelter differ from a homeless shelter?
I'll talk about the continuum of care. Each community develops a continuum of care for homelessness or for housing. And it starts with the most basic needs of sheltering all the way to home ownership in a community. Mm-hmm. And some of the gaps when we were looking at what exactly is it that we need with homelessness was you have the most basic needs of you don't want people freezing to death, to you have a consistent shelter where people are being sheltered and probably being transitioned into transitional housing, where people then are able to learn how to stabilize themselves in housing and move to more traditional housing rental. So that's the continuum of care. And when we realized that we had a strong need for this warming shelter concept, we had to really clearly understand what is it that warming shelter is compared to a normal homeless shelter. So there's varying, even in the homeless shelter spectrum, there's quite a varying degrees of what does it mean to be homeless. And we didn't want to duplicate services. So your question is a good question of who are you serving that the homeless shelter is not serving? And who gets served in a warming shelter are typically people that are not able to get sheltered in like a normal homeless shelter. And some of those people could have a past history of crimes that wouldn't allow them to get into a typical shelter, or just typical addiction issues where they need stronger supervision. So a warming shelter has stronger supervision where people are in one single room and they're supervised all night long. Where at a homeless shelter, such as Father Carr, they're given their own room. Mm-hmm. And there's just different levels of supervision that's needed for a warming shelter compared to a standard homeless shelter.
Okay. All right.
Warming shelter is for all night?
It's all night long.
Okay,
it's
so
not
the
during
next
the
morning
daytime.
then they would be discharged, they'd have to leave?
That's correct.
Right.
Okay. This is really interesting. Did Oshkosh ever have a mission?
I don't know.
Okay. In the communities I grew up in, every city had a mission.
That was what they used to call it,
Yeah,
isn't it?
well, we still have missions, and the one I'm in Grand Forks, North Dakota. I lived most of my life, and they currently have about 80 people in the mission. It's right uptown, and they can stay for a little while. They can't stay for a long time, but if they need a place, they can go in there, no charge, and pretty knowledgeable. So what concerns me is that you got all of these social service agencies, and here's a gap. And I don't understand why there is a gap. Maybe you can help me on that. It just seems to me that with all of these organizations, United Way just collected $1 million for this year. I mean, can't they give a little money to create a warming place?
Well, they're very supportive of this effort.
Yeah, well, they should be.
They are.
Yeah.
They are. In fact, they are serving as our fiscal agent currently, so they have been very supportive.
Right.
But I think that actually warming shelters are relatively new even in other communities. Green Bay has had one for maybe 5 years. Appleton has had one for maybe 3 years.
Yep.
And Fond du Lac's just opened last year. So they have had emergency shelters or other kinds of homeless shelters and not warming shelters. And I think in Oshkosh, Father Carr has done a great job for a long time. And I think that the general perception in Oshkosh is when you think homeless, you go, oh, you know what, check, that's all taken care of here because we have Father Carr. So I think that is one of the reasons that it hasn't been addressed. And probably the economy has caused more people to fall into the category that we're talking about, and so the need became surfaced a little bit more. So I think that that's why.
And one thing beyond just funding that is needed is an entity that comes together to say we need to make it happen. And that was what was really missing in Oshkosh. There were a lot of people that really supported the concept. I mean, we had support all over the place, but not a group that was willing to do the work to pull it together so that it would be truly a community-based homeless shelter.
And that's what ESTHER does.
Okay.
ESTHER draws people together.
So what is, just kind of piggybacking on what Dan was saying, what is United Way's role in this? What exactly are they doing?
Well, ESTHER's role is to discern an issue and bring the community around that. And we have done that very well. And we've had a couple of large community and clergy meetings over the last year. We've been working on this for about a year now.
Okay.
And and as I said, lots and lots of support. And what we want to end up doing, it will not be an Esther shelter, and it will not be a particular church's shelter or wherever the location happens to be, but it will be a shelter from a created 501c3, a new nonprofit. And we are in the process of getting that right now. So until we get that, we need a fiscal agent to handle donations and to give us credibility. And the United Way said, we will make that available. So there are churches and other people who have given donations, and that's where they...
Are you looking for a physical facility? Is that kind of what you need a place?
Well, we have had a place offered to us now.
You have?
We have had a place offered
Good.
to us, yes. It's
Because, I can drive around town. There must be 200,000 square feet of unused religious church property. I mean, I can walk a block away and it's used maybe 4 hours a week. So, I mean, and you go to the Episcopal Church, that big building behind the church.
Right.
There's beaucoup space. Isn't there?
Yeah.
But there's also rules and regulations
Okay.
of where you can shelter people. So
Yeah.
we've been working very
Understand.
closely and really well with the city to determine what's a safe facility that we can use for sheltering
Sure,
individuals.
no, I understand that.
And we have been offered a place, and we're working to make that place happen. So do you want to say where that place is?
I think we can say that because I think it's pretty public. We had a couple fits and starts, and then some clergy that offered, and then for one reason or another it didn't work out.
Okay.
And there were several reasons, but Most Blessed Sacrament, which
Okay.
now, as you know, is St. Mary's and St. Peter's.
Okay.
And at the St. Peter's site, there is their old gym. There's the church, and then the office, and then the gym, and then underneath that, just half the floor down, is a really big cafeteria with a kitchen, and it's really a lovely.
And it's a good location.
It's a great
Yeah.
location.
Right.
And so the Father Jim, I'm going to say his name wrong, but I think it's Jugenheimer, I think. Sweet Father Jim is how I refer to him now.
That's good enough.
Yes. Called me actually the day before Christmas and said that he had been thinking about it, and this was a place he could offer. And on that also same day, we also got a very large donation. So
Wonderful.
it was pretty
Christmas came, huh?
It did.
Yeah.
It did indeed.
What kind of staffing you're going to need? You talked earlier about, I know the city will be in there with regulations on,
They've already gone through and
They
looked
have,
at it. So
yeah.
we know what we need to do with the facility to get it to code.
Okay.
So what we're looking at for staff is a director that can work with the community and with the other staff on board. And we are looking at having most likely 2 staff positions, probably hiring 4 staff overall for those 2 slots per night. And then we're also looking at having a number of volunteers so that the staff is always there with volunteers. Some normal daily work that needs to be done is the intake process, so that when people are coming in that they're registered and we have an understanding of who's being sheltered. And then there's some meals that would be provided. There'd be an evening meal. It could be a cold meal, it could be a hot meal, but that would most likely be handled a lot by donations or church groups, other groups that would wish to just come in for an evening and take maybe the first Monday of every month and do the meal for that day. But really, it's a small staff that you really need to get it going. It doesn't take a lot for staff. It takes a lot of volunteer work, and we've gotten a tremendous response from the community already saying, please mark me down to volunteer. So it's exciting. Right now, our endeavor is to work to get a good board together and to move the organization itself along so that by October, we're ready to start up and get going.
You're looking at individual rooms?
No.
Just a dormitory type thing?
A warming shelter is generally one large area that can be supervised.
Okay. Male, female separated? Not necessarily?
They would be separated by perhaps a curtain, but
Okay.
something easy to. It is a predominantly male population.
And what kinds of things, what do they sleep on? Is it sleeping bags? Is it, cots? Explain how this is going to look
Sure.
if we were walking in. What would we see?
So you'd walk in and there would be a setup station where you go in and you register yourself, and then you would go into the actual larger room. So that would be outside the door. The larger room would most likely have some type of a table where staff sit, some chairs, or maybe a dining table where people could sit and talk or just rest. And then for the evening time when people are actually sleeping, which is most of this, it's probably going to open somewhere between 7 o'clock and 9 o'clock, depending on what the site determines. And there's just mats on the floor. They're mats that can be wiped down. They're pretty thick mats. It's not just like a small thin mat, but mats that can be wiped down. Each individual would have their own plastic bin that has its own pillow in it, its own blanket in it, and then they can put that back in afterwards. There will be lockers that people can put their contents in, and their contents wouldn't be available to them during their stay. And that's essentially it. It's a pretty simple laid out, and this is what we have seen that other organizations have learned from. So we get to have the benefit of the learnings of.
You wouldn't be upset if someone donated 20 single beds, so would you? I mean,
No.
I mean, it seemed to me that's what you ought to shoot. I mean,
No,
I
and
think that could come pretty easy.
That does
Huh?
happen. Fond du Lac, that I said just opened last winter, they have, I think they are all bunks, but they were
Yeah.
donated. They had quite a bit. And once
it gets going.
generally once they get going,
Yeah.
the community is eager to find places that, I mean, we've already had an awful lot of people say, well, here's a source for furniture, here's a source for food, here's a source. I do believe that Oshkosh is at least as generous and compassionate as all these other communities that have done this. And so we actually have people like backed up waiting to help.
Washer and dryer is something that we would want.
Shower?
There's shower facilities
Okay.
in this location. They would need to be updated. So
Sure.
that would be something that probably we wouldn't be looking at the first year.
I understand, yeah.
Despite all of the generosity and enthusiasm for this, there have been some negative comments. I've heard them just overhearing people talking when I've been out in public. You've read some of them. Well, I have. I don't know if you have. I'm sure
Yes,
you
I
have,
have.
Tina, online. I was kind of disturbed by some of these comments because they're coming from people who are naive and not educated about this issue, as I think a lot of us aren't. I mean, this is a whole new concept for
That's why we're
all
here.
of us, exactly. But then there were just, I thought, some very insensitive, unkind, unwarm, to use the warm phrase, just nasty, vile comments saying, well, one of the reasons we don't have a lot of homeless people walking around Oshkosh is because we don't have something like this. I found those comments shameful, really. But how would you respond to someone like that who has that opinion, or to the person who says, you know what, if we have something like this, our crime rate is going to go up? I would think it would be just the opposite.
Right.
Or maybe it wouldn't be a factor at all. But how would you respond to those
When we were
kinds of comments?
first looking into this, a question that I had in my mind is, what is the reoccurrence rate from year to year with the guests that would stay at a shelter? And so we asked the 3 shelters that we knew, and Appleton, when I had spoke to them at the time, they said that they only had 1 guest that came back from the previous year. So as far as this secular constant cycle of homelessness, we didn't see that. I think the number was a little bit larger in Green Bay, but overall it wasn't anything rather significant. The safety issue also came up, both for those that are in the shelter and those surrounding the shelter. And well, I'll let you touch on that because you've spoken to the law enforcement quite a bit.
I have. The shelters that are around us have had very good relationships with the police, and I have to say that the Oshkosh Police Department is eager to have the shelter. They have many instances where they don't know. There's many things they do, but they've got nowhere to go with them. And so I asked them, like, how often do you have to call the police? And in all the shelters, in all the years, if you put them all together open, it's been less than a handful of times. People. These are not dangerous people, they're desperate people. They have nowhere else. They generally come in and eat something and go to sleep.
Right.
And that's it. And so the crime rate, that's not a correlation. The people who would be dispassionate about it, I'm usually pretty forgiving of that. In Appleton, because they just don't know. In Appleton, the way the shelter worked up there was that one church started it. One priest, one church started it, and he just opened the doors. He didn't worry about the city. He didn't worry about all the things we're worrying about, being proactive. He just opened the door. And then they worked up to that, and they did that for the first year. I think that church did
That's
it by
right.
itself for the whole first year. Then other churches wanted to get involved, and it ended up being something like 20 churches, and they rotated it week to week to week to week. And at each of those churches, and they had a van that went to a location downtown and picked people up who wanted to be sheltered and took them to wherever it was. And they needed 42 volunteers a week at every church, and they had to turn people away. So there were people who would prepare the meal, people who would volunteer in shifts to stay overnight, people who just sat and listened or played cards. And because of that, the entire community and all those churches got to know this population of people and understand better that there, but for the grace of God, go we. And so it was very helpful. I mean, it was a really logistically hard thing to do, but it was really good in that way. And these people will come to know this after the shelter is open for a while.
Tina, you and I had talked a couple months ago about this, but there certainly is a need for this. There's a need for more homeless shelters, period. And that rang so true for me when I was down in Miami in November. And, you know, at that point, it really wasn't all that cold up here yet. Certainly not the way it is tonight or has been this week. But when I was on my way to the airport, I saw all these people in sleeping bags sleeping on the sidewalks. And I said to the driver, I said, "That's legal?" He said, "Well, nobody bothers them because they have no place to go." And he took it one step further, and I mean dozens and dozens, and this was just on one street. But he said that a lot of them, at that time of year, and probably now, they're coming from states like ours, where it's starting to get colder in November and so forth. They don't have a place to go. They have no home, and the homeless shelters are full. And so they tend to migrate south to where it's warmer. And it was eye-opening and heartbreaking to see people huddled in sleeping bags with maybe a shopping cart or a couple of bags sitting next to them, paper bags of their belongings. And this is all these people have. And unless you actually see it, I don't think you can really appreciate the need.
That's true.
And it was heart-wrenching. I mean, that's the easiest way for me to describe it. It was heart-wrenching. Back to getting this place up to code. Stephanie, you said that you're working with the city to get it up to code. What kinds of things have to be done to make it up to code?
Mostly just some basic safety things, fire alarms in appropriate areas, carbon monoxide detectors, fire extinguishers, emergency lighting. So it's pretty basic stuff. We're not too concerned about all the things that we have to do, except for where it comes to fundraising to ensure that can be properly done. So we have a good amount of time right now to get that up and going before October, and we're confident that we'll be able to raise the funds that would be necessary. Although at that point, the board that we have will be in charge of a lot of the fundraising.
And that's the target date, is October of 2011?
Right.
Okay.
I have to put a little plug in here for the city too, because the first time we were offered a location a few months ago, I called Alan Davis at planning and told him about it and said, "We need you to come over and look at this and let us know what it could be." And he said, "Well, I'll set a time to do it, and I will make sure that inspection is there. I will be there, inspection will be there, and fire will be there. And we'll all come at once, so you don't have to call lots of different times." And it was wonderful. So there were several people who met with us all at once, came over and spent quite a bit of time. They want this to happen, and they've been very helpful. And then when that one didn't work out, we called them again. And then we called them again. And then we called them again. So it's been 4 times. I go, hello, it's me again. And so I have to say that they have been terribly gracious and helpful, and doing the best they can with it. We really feel a collaboration with the city. It's been really, really nice.
Well, there's a lot of elements here that have to come together, a lot of pieces of the pie that have to all be worked on for it to come together to make one big pie that serves everybody who needs it. But as you're working on this and so forth, it takes time. Where do you suppose these folks who will be your clients, if you will, where are they staying now? Because it's awfully cold out there now.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, where are they? Are they at other shelters in, you know, these other communities? Where do you suspect they are?
We know that some of the locations are some restrooms. Sometimes they'll find themselves in, well, just any place that they can stay warm and relatively safe. That's essentially what they're looking for. They're good at finding little pockets of places to stay so that they're safe. And safety is a key thing for those individuals that are out on the streets. They do fall victim to crime and to, being mugged and whatnot. So we don't know exactly where they are, but we do know that they're here.
Sure. Well, you know, you also mentioned earlier that the reason that they may not be able to be in a homeless shelter is because they've committed some crime themselves in the past or what have you. So what kinds of supervision then will you have?
Sure.
I mean, you touched on this a little bit before with, you know, a staff person and volunteers and that kind of thing, but what kinds of supervision will you have to ensure that there aren't issues?
It's continual supervision, so there's no place that an individual will be going where they wouldn't be supervised except for perhaps in the bathroom stall itself. So there's no wandering around the church, there's no going outside for cigarette breaks, they are where they are. Their belongings or anything that they would bring in with them would be held in a locker that's locked so that it wouldn't be, so they know it's safe and also it's safe from anyone else. So they're there with who and what they are. But in addition to that, there will be training that staff will have to keep, you know, circumstances calm. There will be a close relationship with the local law enforcement, who actually very much supports this shelter. So learning from what other shelters have gone through, it's a lot of training, a lot of understanding of people that perhaps have some mental health issues, but really people are looking for a place to sleep. It doesn't seem that the safety issue is going to be overwhelmingly risky. I think we have to be aware of it and be concerned for the training of the staff and volunteers that are there, as well as the guests that are staying.
Okay.
What sort of screening are you going to do? I mean, if a guy comes in at 7:30 at night, you know, you can't do an extensive check on him, can you? You're just going to fill out a form and that's it, or?
Well, there's a standard form actually. I think it's called Service Point. Point and
yes, Service Point. You're correct.
Point that's used by shelters, and it is pretty extensive. So it takes a little while. It's many pages. It's data so that we know who we're serving, and data so that grants can be gotten.
What if the person can't fill it out?
Well, that can happen. If they can't at all fill it out, it depends on like if it needs to be in Spanish, then we might have to get an interpreter. If they can't read it at all, we'd have to read it to them. If they're not in a condition to fill it out, then depending on that will be the judgment of the operations manager or the director that's there at the time.
But clearly a person's not going to say, I have a criminal record, can I sleep there?
We do take names, and the names are given to law enforcement each night. So we won't be harboring any individual. So they're right.
It's a low barrier, but not no barrier.
No, and you got to have some. Yeah.
Yes, and there's rules, and if there's a warrant, then they would have to leave.
Yeah. Do you have any profile on these people? I mean, do you know, are they repeaters? Are they around all the time? Or is this strictly a transient thing that they're here one week and gone the next week? Do you have any idea?
Well, actually, they are generally people who live here.
They are, so they're more permanent.
And a common picture of someone who would be a guest in this warming shelter would be somebody who has lost their job or has no means of income at all, and maybe stays with a friend or a family member for a few weeks or a few months until things get bad or there's a fight or there's not enough money, and then they need a place like warming shelter. Then they might stay for a couple of weeks and try going back or find a different friend until that doesn't work out. That's a common
More males than females?
More males than
Okay.
females.
Significantly
about
more.
About 80-20.
80-20, okay. Ages are older?
That's a good question. This shelter will only take people 18 and over.
Okay.
So
So a young mother would come in with a couple of young children, that's not going to work.
Right, then
Okay.
she would probably go to Father Carr's
Okay.
then.
Right.
Usually people who are at this place, at the place of needing a warming shelter, usually children have already been dealt with in some way,
Okay.
often. But there's, we would call them social workers or call Father Carr's, and they can go there.
What about a repeater? I want to stay from October to April. Is that going to be allowed, or is there a time limit on how long they can stay there?
Not all of the policies have been developed, and certainly we would let the board decide
Sure.
a lot of those policies. Again, from what we see in other shelters, that's just not happening. There might be a few individuals that need long-term
Okay.
sheltering, but I think the average stay, I want to say, was somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks
I think
when we
that
were
could be
looking at
right.
other shelters.
Okay. So they are somewhat transient then.
Well, they can find some other place
Okay,
then
I
that
see.
works out for them.
Go to another city.
You know, they would rather, this isn't the Hilton, you know.
No,
So
Right.
But it's warm. and
it
there's
is
a
warm.
bed.
It is a bed, and
Yeah.
that's great.
Right.
Yeah.
But there are,
There's no privacy.
Mm-hmm.
It keeps you from freezing to death. And honestly, that's where 2 of the shelters in the Fox cities, well, the one in Appleton and the one in Green Bay really started, was people concerned. Well, one in Green Bay, 2 people had frozen to death. In Appleton, one of the priests was fearing that a person he saw laying offside of the sidewalk was frozen to death, and he wasn't. But that made him start to think, what are we doing here in Appleton? So it's keeping people alive, and it's certainly a means to get people to safer and more stabilized sheltering. We wouldn't want to see this be the future of the guests that are there.
Dan and I were talking earlier today about the numbers of homeless that we have in our area, and we don't really have a number. We have no idea. And why is that? Because in my mind, and this is one of the things we sort of touched on, is, when you go to a food pantry, I don't know, I would think you have to provide some kind of identification, and it has an address on it or something, or you have to provide an address. If someone has no address, I would think that that's a good indicator that they have no home, and therefore are homeless. Why is it that we don't have a handle on how many homeless we're really dealing with in Oshkosh?
I think some people do. That would be a good question to ask Joe Janess. I think he would have a more solid number. This service point database that we mentioned earlier is a database that homeless shelters use across the country. So there is a way to have at least a pretty strong understanding of the number of homelessness in the area and the trends of, are we increasing or decreasing the number of homelessness over a given period. We're not homelessness experts here,
Sure, I
so
understand.
I don't know what all those numbers are, but certainly that would be a good question for Joe to know or to
And I think
respond
this
to.
offers an excellent model for a social work major, a thesis, to spend a year with assuming that they would, to get a better profile. What is the socioeconomic base of these people? And then you can
Sure.
prescribe other things to meet them. But we really don't know.
No.
Yeah. It's like Cheryl and I talked for quite a bit this afternoon. Here's a city with 70,000 people with all of these agencies, and this is just, police know a little bit,
Yep.
they know a little bit here, but there's no, hard place that can keep track of these things. And I think that's too bad. It's like mental illness. How many people in the community are mentally ill?
That's
Sure.
right.
Yeah.
They're
It's
just
a
out there.
difficult, they are just out there, and it's
Yeah.
a difficult number to get.
Yeah.
And I was just going to say, the more we bring in collaboration, the greater we'll understand
absolutely. Yeah.
the needs. So that's something that's been exciting that's happened so
yeah.
far, is the number of people and organizations that have come together to say, yes, we need to be working together on
bet.
Here's
this
what we
issue
see.
and many others too.
Okay. Well, why don't we, take a short break here, and then we will bring Joe in. Stephanie, you're going to leave us. You have
I
another
am.
meeting to get to.
I
Tina,
do.
you're staying.
Yeah.
But before we do, end this particular segment, what kinds of needs do you need, and how can people help? how can they get involved?
Well,
Go ahead.
That's a good question. We, as far as actual volunteers and people who would want to do things like make a plate of sandwiches and that kind of thing, we will get that word out like late in the summer as we're getting ready to do that. Right now it's just funding. We're just getting ready to have a giant fundraising strategy. Because we are not an entity yet, and because it's, anyone can make donations to the United Way with the memo day by day. That's what we're going to call the shelter, day by day, if they feel so moved. And I think that's 36 Broad Street, United Way is. And we're going to approach churches during this first year because we're not an entity, we aren't eligible for too many federal or government grants. We're hoping to get funds from other places, faith communities, individuals, companies, local people, and we're beginning to work on that. So we are happy to come and talk about this at any faith community or any civic group, and you'll hear from us.
Yeah. I think when you're ready to kick off a big fundraiser, you should come back.
I agree.
Give the
Yeah.
dates
I
and what
agree.
we're going to do, and then we'll kick it
That's
out.
a really
Thank you
good
for the
idea.
invitation.
Absolutely do
That's
that.
a great idea.
So, all right. And will the United Way be kicking in any money of its own?
Well, they haven't said so, but
Okay.
We have to.
Well,
we have to talk.
Let's put that plea out there.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
they should.
Yeah.
So,
they have been, Suponic though has been hugely helpful, and
Yes, she
so
has.
they're on our side.
okay, all right, good. Well, let's hope they come up with a little ka-ching for you.
Yes, you'd be surprised where it comes, but where it gets offered from. You'd be surprised.
All right, well, thanks very much
Yeah.
to both of you.
Thank you.
You have
Thank
a,
you.
luck.
have a
Thank you so
successful
much.
meeting
Thank you.
later on tonight. We will take a short break, and Joe Janess will be joining Dan, Tina, and I right after this.
Every year, the U.S. Department of the Treasury receives about 1.4 million reports of problems with paper checks. Checks can be lost, stolen, or delayed. If you still receive Social Security payments by paper check, Treasury wants you to know about a safer, more convenient way to get your money. The Direct Express Prepaid Debit MasterCard. The Direct Express card is new and is available to anyone receiving Social Security benefits, even if you don't have a bank account. Your monthly benefits will be automatically placed onto your card account each month on the day your money is due. While other debit cards cost money, it is possible to use the Direct Express card for free to make purchases, pay bills, and get cash at thousands of locations nationwide. There are no sign-up or monthly account fees. No more waiting for the mail or worrying about lost or stolen checks. Call 1-877-212-9991 or visit www.usdirectexpress.com.
Welcome back to the second half of Eye on Oshkosh, and as promised, Joe Janess from Father Carr's Place to Be is here now joining us, and you've been on a couple times in the
Yes.
past, I think, so welcome
Thanks for having me
back.
back.
Good to see you, Joe.
Always nice to have you. So I don't know if you've been listening to the
A little
first
bit, yes.
segment, but obviously, we wanted to find out a few things from you, and one of the things that Stephanie mentioned that we should probably ask right off the bat is what kind of numbers do you have, if any, on homeless in our community? How many people are we dealing with?
Good question. And that number has gone up over the last 3 years.
Because of the economy?
I think, I cross my fingers, thank God, I think we've leveled off the last couple of months. Actually, over the last year, it's been about an average of 100 people per day.
Wow.
and which has made us the busiest shelter in the Midwest outside of Milwaukee and Chicago.
Is that right? Wow.
So it's been a really busy time. We feed 100,000 meals a year, and in our shelter, like I said, it's about 100. I think it's almost 40,000 beds that were slept in last year at our place. So it's.
Can you handle 100 a day?
We can handle 150. We have 2 shelters, one for women and children and one for men, and each takes about 75. We don't ever want to be that high because then they are just numbers. It's hard to give them the attention they need.
Yeah.
So 100 really is a high number that we like to have. So I hope the economy, and I totally blame it on jobs. It seems that someone who was motivated 3 years ago, within a day or two could go get a minimum wage job. Nowadays, it takes up to a month or more. It just seems to take forever. 3 years ago, people stayed with us an average of 27 days. Now that number's up to 60 days.
Ah.
So it just takes longer for them to get back on their feet.
And where do you get your funding from, Joe?
It's all private. We don't get any or apply for any government funding. So it's all mostly private individuals, some private grants, and so that's where 100% comes from private people.
Anything from the United Way? I know we've talked about them a little bit
No,
here tonight.
we haven't applied for any United Way money.
Okay, all right.
Do you see Esther as sort of a complimentary thing for you?
Very much so. It was about a year, actually, when I first kind of instigated this whole thing with the warming shelter.
Joe came to us.
Because I was a co-chair of the Winnebago Land Housing Coalition, and we looked at services that weren't being met. And having a homeless shelter as a part of our mission, I looked at those that we could not serve. And it all comes down to safety. We house people in a room, and they have to be trusted to, and sometimes people, goof up and they break the guidelines, but we have guidelines, and we do a safety check when people come in. When Father Carr was alive, he didn't have the use of computers or the internet. Right now, with the computer age, everybody's record is wide open. And so we're able to use that to make sure our place is safe. So when I say we have 100 people a day, for those 100 people's safety, we have to make sure that we have some guidelines. And the guidelines all come down to safety. Some people say, oh, you don't take felons, oh, you don't take mental illness. We do. We have a lot of felons that live with us. I don't want to give a picture that everyone's a felon.
Sure.
Right.
But when I say people can't stay with us for safety reasons, it's usually because of things like sexual assault or battery, domestic abuse, those types of things where you physically, sexually hurt someone. But burglary, drugs, other things in people's past, we can look beyond that toward the future and allow them to stay. It's only when they've hurt somebody. And so a year ago, I looked at those people that we could not serve, along with those that are actively drinking. We can't have them stay. Again, people that are recovering and are living with us that are living a life of sobriety, to have somebody else come and stay that is drinking, actively drinking, would be a problem with their sobriety. So we do have a certain number of people that we just can't serve. So we looked at, should we, as Father Carr's place to be, we looked at, should we do that? And we spent a couple months looking at it, and finally this summer came to a conclusion that we just have our hands full. Our hearts were, at least for sure mine, that's why I kind of got it all stirred up. I really wanted to do it, but the board and myself, we all came to an agreement that we have enough going because of all that I mentioned, and we also have a free health clinic, which really keeps us busy.
Sure. Can you talk a little bit about these 100 people? Give me a little profile.
Yeah. First of all, they're not all Oshkosh people.
Okay.
When somebody comes to us and says they need a place to stay, we can't say no if we can help them. We don't go by geographical boundaries. Most of the people are from Oshkosh, but there are people from outside the area. We do get an overflow from other shelters in the Fox Valley area, from Fond du Lac through Green Bay. When we are up to that 100 number, we have been saying no to outside of the, we just stay to Winnebago County and the outlying counties. Because first of all, other counties, most of the other counties in this area don't have a shelter. Fond du Lac does, Appleton does, Green Bay, and us in Oshkosh here. But the other outlying areas just don't have one. So again, if somebody's calling and they need something and we can offer it, we don't say no. So there are people from outside the area.
What about age?
Age, it really is anywhere from 18, speaking of the adults, 18 on up to 60s, 70s. I'd say there is a large population of young people, though. I used to say old is older than myself and young is younger than myself.
Gotcha.
I'll use young at this time in their 20s and 30s that just, they lose a job and they aren't high skilled, and it takes them a long time to find a job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, when you mention shelters, you're talking like in some of these other communities, Fond du Lac, Appleton, Green Bay, and us here. You're talking not just a warming shelter now, because those also have warming shelters.
Right.
You're talking a homeless shelter in addition.
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
One of the things Dan mentioned earlier, he asked, was, did Oshkosh ever have a mission? And, I'm born and raised here, but I can't remember ever having a mission, but it seemed to me that was, and I could be wrong, and maybe as you've taken this over from Father Carr, you can kind of expand on this a little bit, but I sort of thought that was his goal, if you will, when he started Father Carr's Place to Be, wasn't it?
It is. And it was back in 1974, coincidentally at St. Peter's Church in Oshkosh. And now
Everything comes full circle, doesn't
that's
it?
maybe where the warming shelter is going to start, what used to be St. Peter's. So, yeah, in 1974, he actually started out with the youth center, and through the youth center had kids saying, I can't go home because my mom is beat up by my dad, or et cetera. So there were people that needed a place to stay, and so he started taking in people, which grew into what we have today. And through that, it moved from the present location, Oshkosh Ave. It actually moved to the old Boys and Girls Club downtown on the corner of Main and Merritt. And his reason for moving there at that time was that's where the poor of the area were. That's where the homeless were walking the streets. And it worked. But the city, I think, wanted the downtown, had other plans for the downtown area. And because he had the Oshkosh Ave and just wanted to put everything back in one location, he did complete the buildings that we have today. And that was back in the early 2001, 2003 is when the buildings went up. So he did have a dream when I met him in 1981 of having a mission where he could serve the homeless, where he could have a free health clinic and have meals and give out groceries. And when he died, he had that. Now we live his dream. Unfortunately, with every service there is, you can't serve everybody. And so there are people that are being, at this time of the year, left out in the cold. And so that really bothered me a year ago. And unfortunately, it just takes a long time to get something like this started. On the short term, I said we have rules, and some people, because of their criminal history, et cetera, or drinking, can't stay with us. We try to do our best because of the cold. The other night we had a guy that was drinking. He wasn't drunk, so we let it go till the next morning and handle it the next morning. So we do try and stretch the rules a little bit in the wintertime. But if there's a guy that, had a attempted murder and he wants to stay with us, we got to say no, knowing that I have no idea where he's going to go.
Right.
So that's why it is an important thing, no matter how small or large the numbers are for a warming shelter, it's just an important thing you know, as Christians, as good community members, we do need to serve everybody. You know, if I were a numbers guy, I'd feel real comfortable. We serve 90-some% of the people. But I think about those one or two that we're not serving. And
Sure.
I think a warming shelter is a needed thing.
Sure. You know, we don't have a lot of time left, Joe, but, you know, dispel a couple rumors or confirm them for us. One of the things I read on the Northwestern's blog, for example, in relation to this story, was that you do not allow any men there who are not clean shaven. Is that true, or is that somebody telling tales out of school?
It's stretching the truth.
Okay.
When we're working with a guy, we'll talk about a man that's looking for a job, we'll say, you know, you got to really be clean shaven. You got to look sharp. You got to have clean clothes. We have washers and dryers, and encourage people to. Sometimes people's hygiene isn't good, and you got to tell them the hard suggestions. You know,
So they can have facial hair, but it has to be neatly groomed.
neatly groomed if they're
Okay.
looking for a job.
Okay.
I
all
have
right.
a goatee. I have a job. So I
And Jesus Christ had, you know.
so
He
I
was-
personally
he was
have
not-
nothing against the way people look, but unfortunately employers do. So they
Yep.
and they have a right to.
Sure.
It's their place and they're running it. So to encourage people to get jobs, we do put pressure on people sometimes to, you know, spruce up a little
But
bit.
you wouldn't do that before.
But
you
we
let 'em
wouldn't
in.
say tonight, I wouldn't go
Right,
home
right.
after this and say, you know, you didn't shave today, you're
Right.
going to have to leave.
Right.
So, yeah. So that's how the truth does get stretched a little.
So
on that.
neatly trimmed.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know,
all
I
right.
would like to say that in the research that we've done at Esther with the emergency shelters, we differentiate emergency shelters and warming shelters. So I think of Joe's as an emergency shelter.
Right.
The rules and the policies in place at Joe's are very common to the other emergency shelters, and so people don't like to have rules. That's, you know, and it infringes on them, but it is the way it is. And Father Carr has done this job for a long, long time,
Yes.
done a good job, and
Yes.
it is very in line with other emergency shelters.
Yeah, he's
in
got
the-
families, he's got women, he's got to have rules.
Yeah.
Yes,
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, come on.
indeed.
Well, how can people, you know, tell us real quickly what your needs are and how people can help?
Well, the community has been wonderful, and right now coming up is Help for the Homeless that the WMI is doing, and so there's a lot of places in the community people can donate things, and personal care items, you know, deodorant, toothpaste, toothbrushes, cleaning supplies. So there's that drive going on right now. If they'd like to participate, or, you know, any time of the year they can bring it out to our place. You know, with an average of 100 people, we do go through a lot of
bet you do.
deodorant. We
Sure.
do go through a lot of laundry detergent. So those items, you know, and then as well as the common things everyone thinks of, the food, non-perishable goods, 90-some thousand meals a year goes through a lot of food. And we're always looking for groups, church groups, community groups, families, to cook a meal and bring it in. So they can always call if they want to work on a project like that.
Okay, excellent. Well, very good. Well, thanks to both of you for
thank
all
you.
your
Thank
efforts
you.
to help people who are less fortunate than those of us sitting here in this room and at this table.
Yes.
So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks again for being here, and thanks to all of you for joining us. We will see you next time. Until then, take good care. Keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.